Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet.
Hello, and welcome back to our Planet Policy Pals podcast.
Yay!
We took a really long break, Ala. But hey, listen, we were enjoying our summer, even though it was me time summer, and I felt like it was just for me, but I talked to people, and apparently it was for everyone. So if you were not having me time this summer, what were you even doing, really? But we are finally back.
Yeah. Well, I had no me time this summer. I had like a lot of medical emergencies within my family for people I was responsible for. So that's what I did all summer. And I also worked. And my research hit a roadblock. But everything's great now. So yeah, I'm here.
Sorry to hear that, girl.
It's okay.
Well,
I miss doing this show so much. You guys don't even know.
honestly, yeah, me too. You guys don't know. Really, we did miss it. And we felt constant guilt of every weekend that we were not recording. Honestly, the kind of support that we've seen. And we're like, you know what? We have people who listen to us and who want us back. So we had to.
I know, we're like mini almost famous in New Zealand. Or that's what I choose to believe. Thank you guys.
100%. Before we get into today's episode, let's talk about our upcoming series.
Yes.
We are going to be investigating environmental myths. I said that with my fingers up. And stuff that we all just assume is true. Basically, things that are fear-mongering and exaggeration, or things that are being downplayed. Because I know climate change is thrown around very casually. So what we're going to do is take all those things that people address, and we're going to let you know whether what people are telling you on social media is true or not. Because we do a lot of research, guys. We spend so many hours just reading and reading and reading. And a lot of stuff we don't even like reading, but we do it just so we can bring you this podcast that we all love.
That's true. I mean, most of it we enjoy reading. Huge nerds over here.
Not me.
But yeah, so...
I was a nerd. Not me. I'm a cool person, you guys. I promise.
Oh my God, not this again. God, you know what? I'll let the listeners be the judge of who the real nerd is. Anyway, so in series 5, so it's called Is It True? And most of this came from social media because we talk a lot with ourselves. Like, we'll see a post and we'll send it to each other and be like, girl, I can't believe people believe this is true. So that's basically the point of this. We are going to get into the Kardashians, your faves, Taylor Swift, and their private jets. Yep. We're going to talk fast fashion. Y'all know we love talking about fashion on this show, and not because we want to be like, ooh, cool fashion. It's like, ooh, fashion is killing the world. Yeah. And then, of course, like, we've been seeing a lot of disasters. So, like, are seasons, like, screwed forever? Are we ever going to get them back? We'll see. We're also going to discuss cocaine, y'all. And, like, cool interviews. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up. So, you guys... stay tuned for series 5. It's exciting.
Yeah, it had to be exciting because we realized what we did. We took a very long break, and we know you guys miss us like crazy, and we know your life meant absolutely nothing without us.
Okay.
So we're back.
Yeah.
But let's get into today's episode. Well, this episode is obviously geared towards the floods that are happening in Pakistan. Since I am from Pakistan and I live here, and honestly, my heart is in this country. And we are honestly facing one of the worst climate disasters that we have faced in, honestly, ever. Pakistan is not an old country. We're less than 100 years. We're like 70-something years old. So we are facing a monsoon that is on steroids, according to Antonio Guterres, who is the United Nations Secretary General. So from June through August, Pakistan has received 190% of its normal rainfall. But that's just overall. In Sindh and Balochistan, the two provinces that have been hit hardest, they have faced almost 500% more than their average rainfall during the monsoon season.
Can I just say that's a lot? I mean, 190% is crazy, but then you consider that some regions are even surpassing that. 190% is almost double what you would expect. That means no one is prepared for it.
500% means absolutely nobody's prepared for it, right?
Exactly.
Like, you can build all those mitigation efforts, but this is a serious climate crisis. July alone exceeded the total normal monsoon rainfall by about 26%, right? So it became the wettest July since 1961. And the only reason we know it since 1961 is because 61 is when numbers started being recorded. So we didn't really have any records prior to 1961. So this is the wettest July that we have seen. And the heavy rainfall, it saturated soil. It prevented ground from soaking up more water from storms that happened in August. And rainfall during monsoon season, it peaks in August, which has continued to bring remarkable downpours and flooding. And Pakistan's downpours have flooded a third of the country, according to officials, and it has affected 33 million people, and it has killed at least 1,200 people so far, from what we know. And of course, we focus on Pakistan because we cannot have a podcast that is on climate change and not talk about one of the biggest climate crises that we have seen in recent times. And also, I would find any reason to shit on rich countries for not doing their part to stop these disasters, because we see a lot of these poorer countries facing this. Today, it's Pakistan. Tomorrow, it could be any other country, really.
That's true, guys. She will take any opportunity to shit on rich people. She loves doing it. You would think she was poor. She's not poor. I just want to say that on the show.
Listen, I'm not a billionaire.
That's true. That's true. I'm not against people being rich, but I don't think billionaires are necessary, I guess.
Constant debate of, are there any ethical billionaires? So I don't know, except for maybe the woman who owns Canva, because I really like her.
I'm really into her too. Yeah.
But what caused the floods, right? Short answer, of course, climate change. But there are very different factors that led to such a massive scale of flooding. Ala, do you want to start us and then I can take over?
Yes. Y'all know I love to talk glaciers, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Glacial outburst floods. Everybody kind of knows this, and if you don't know, now you know. But there's more glacial ice in Pakistan than in any other nation outside the extreme polar regions, generally speaking. And of course, we've had long-term global warming. We can all agree to that. And that has led to an increase in how much outburst floods we get from glaciers, which is where melting water that engorges lakes will burst through the boundaries and flood the areas that are downstream. The thing about glacial outburst floods is that I won't say they're totally unpredictable, but they can come very suddenly. I mean, we track these things, but they can come very suddenly. In the Pakistan-administered Gilgit-Baltistan, part of the Kashmir region, there are roughly 3,000 glacial lakes. That's a lot. That's like a lot of water that can come at you real fast. La Nina, which we've talked about a little bit on this show, I'm going to refer you to episodes, I want to say 36, tend to intensify the springtime heat that precedes the summer monsoons across South Asia, thinking Pakistan and India. So this year's pre-monsoon heat was super fierce. I think we were discussing the heat waves between ourselves. We were going to do a heat wave episode. In the southeast Pakistani city of Nawabshah, they got up to 49.5 degrees Celsius. That's 120.2 degrees Fahrenheit, guys, on May 1st.
Yeah.
Look, I live in South Texas, y'all. Sometimes the weather will be like, feels like 106. And I'll be like, all right, bitch, I'm not going nowhere. I'll tell you that. But, yeah, so that's like crazy hot. And of course, due to like a myriad of reasons, the springtime heat wave appears to have been notably less deadly in India and Pakistan than people feared. So they weren't really prepared for that intense heat in the summer, including in the Hunza Valley on May 7th, where they lost a major bridge and 2 power plants were damaged, and another in the Laspur Valley on July 3rd, where roads were cut off and spectators for this festival, they were stranded or something. So the issue is, of course, like, these things are concerning, right? But generally, these are not like the biggest factor when it comes to nationwide floods, which Pakistan had last in 2010, and unfortunately now they're having in 2022. So while rainfall was around 50 millimeters above average across northern Pakistan, temperatures were below average, which I find interesting. So what you're seeing is like, it was insanely hot. And like we said, like these glacial outbursts, I mean, melting is what causes them. It's not like a slow, like, oh, the glaciers are slowly melting and we're getting more water. It just comes at you real fast. And that is one of the things that's contributing to these floods. I do not think people talk about glaciers enough. So I'm really glad that we're bringing that up right now.
Yeah, of course, because in the summer season, in the winter season, glaciers are glaciers, right? In the summer season is when they start melting. And that's when they kind of like contribute to all of that. But that's not even, the glaciers are not even the massive part of what has caused all this flooding.
It's true.
Right, like the majority of flooding that we saw was in Sindh and Balochistan, and these are two of the provinces that are located more on the southern and western part of Pakistan. So we had an intense heat of June and July. So what we had was pre-monsoonal thunderstorms, right? Intense heat of June and July, and just before the arrival of monsoon, right? It can kick off strong thunderstorms, and they can spawn localized torrents, and it can spawn flash floods over the rugged mountainous landscape of northern Pakistan. Rainfall from these storms is not typically as widespread as the monsoonal rains that normally peak in August. So in contrast to the typical pre-monsoonal storms, July 2022, which was this year, it brought an unusually early arrival of a signature monsoon pattern. And that pushed heavy rain into southern Pakistan.
And the thing that you guys have to realize, I know you're probably thinking, if it's hot, then, why would we get more rain? But what you have to realize is that when it gets super hot, there's still moisture in the air. And when the moisture-laden air moves over land, it kind of all comes together into a chaotic storm system. And then you get even more intense precipitation than you thought about. And warmer air contributes to that. That's why it's a problem.
Yeah, of course. The higher the temperatures, that's any groundwater. It's not like Pakistan. I know the general conception is people think Pakistan is a desert. It's not. It has mountains, it has rivers, it has lakes, it has all these things. So when it's really hot, all those water bodies that are in Pakistan, they're going to evaporate, right? And what happens when they evaporate, they're going to go form clouds, and those clouds are going to eventually lead to downpour. That downpour leads to what we are seeing right now. So these rainfall that we saw in July 2022, the monsoonal westerly wind near Pakistan became southwesterly, and that channeled more moisture, right? It was also cooler and more rainy in the coastal area of Pakistan, which is not something that we usually expect around June and July. By August, the clouds, moisture, and rain of the full-fledged summer monsoon usually have typically pushed from India across much of Pakistan, and now sitting on a climatological transition zone between arid and moist climates, Pakistan can experience widely varying monsoon rainfalls totals from year to year. So much like in 2010, right, which was when we had our last super floods, the 2022 flood disaster in Pakistan was also heavily influenced by a tropical cyclone. So tropical depression, which is the BOB07, which refers to the 7th Bay of Bengal storm of the year, it moved across northern India over the third week of August, maintaining its intensity across a waterlogged landscape that was soaked by Bay of Bengal, BOB06, just a few days earlier. So really, the Bay of Bengal storms are numbered, right? So there's BOB7, there's BOB6. So we had both of them sort of overlap. So the remnants of BOB7 then moved into the southern Pakistan provinces of Sindh and Balochistan, where I earlier told you faced the worst brunt of these floods. This made matters much worse, and the remnants stalled and interacted with the semi-stationary low in upper levels of the atmosphere northwest of Pakistan. The setup, if you really want to kind of compare, is very akin to the tropical mid-latitude dynamics that really came into play during Hurricane Harvey's rains in 2017, and which eventually led to the disastrous floods of Louisiana in 2016. And we remember how bad those were. I remember I went to New Orleans in 2018, and our Uber driver really was just showing us all of how they had to rebuild following Hurricane Harvey and all those flooding that happened in Louisiana. So yeah, it really does bring about such a massive scale of destruction. And to make things worse, earlier this year, the country actually faced unprecedented heat waves and months-long droughts in Sindh and Balochistan, the same areas or the same provinces that are hit the worst from this flood. And only a few months later, Pakistan broke its decades-long rainfall record, with 2 provinces receiving, like I said earlier, 500% more precipitation than the annual average. And Pakistan generally gets 3 to 4 cycles of monsoon rains, right? And we know this because Sarah Hayat, you know I stand really strong women. So Sarah Hayat, she's a Lahore-based climate change lawyer and policy specialist.
Oh, we love to see it.
Of course, right? You know I love that. So she said that this year we have received 8 already, right? And there are predictions that rain will go on till October. And that is extremely unusual because we're usually done by monsoon in August. And, you know, worst comes to worst, we usually face it like in the first week of September. But this time, we are predicting it to go into October. So it's not stopping. We don't see a stop to this. And according to a 2021 study, global heating is making the South Asian monsoon way more intense and way more erratic, with each 1 degree Celsius rise in global temperatures leading to a 5% more rain in this area. So, yeah, it's bad, bro.
It is. Like, it really is a serious situation. But let's get into why it's so serious, you guys. So, one of the big effects that, of course, you're going to see. We cannot talk about Pakistan without talking about agricultural land and, of course, what that means for the country. The Global Climate Risk Index, which we love on this show, this is like our 3rd or 4th time referencing it. It puts Pakistan as the 8th most vulnerable country because of disasters caused by climate change. But if you think about it, Pakistan is only responsible for less than 1%, 0.7% of global carbon emissions. There's a big disconnect there. Unfortunately, they're suffering from extreme weather conditions, as we've just said. It puts them in a precarious situation because when you cannot predict weather, it affects how you grow crops. Pakistan has a very seasonal agricultural process. They have winter crops like rice, and then they have summer crops. And there's going to be food shortages. There's no way past it. When we think about the fact that the country already depends on export and external help for things like energy and some of their resources, you realize how much of a problem that this is. Which brings me to the money aspect. Y'all know I cannot go a whole episode without bringing up money. I'm sorry.
She loves her money.
It's true. I love money. I love glaciers. I love meat. I don't know what to tell you.
How are we co-hosts on a climate change policy podcast?
Oh my God. Okay. The financial cost of Pakistan's floods is staggering. Like, the planning minister for the country, and I believe him because it really is bad over there right now, is saying it's going to be about $10 billion worth, which is about 4% of the country's GDP. I'm just going to add here that when we say 4% of the country's GDP, we really do have to also think about the fact that Pakistan owes quite a bit of money, as a lot of developing nations tend to do. It's not a surprise that they owe this amount of money, but they cannot really afford $10 billion right now.
We definitely cannot.
It's not working. More than 700,000 homes have been destroyed, okay? And we have swaths of inundated farmland with water. They're not going to be usable for months. That's another thing to consider. According to Afia Salam, who is a Karachi-based environmental campaigner and journalist, she said, and I'm quoting her, "We are an agricultural country, and there will be no land to cultivate," which is simple but true. So if you're thinking about this, it's going to lead to extreme loss of crop revenue, like I've said. So at 74% of GDP, Pakistan's public debt load is really high, considering the economic status of the people in the country. It is below the level of many other vulnerable economies, but that's still pretty freaking high, considering all the climate issues as well. It owes much less to foreigners, right? And it doesn't always rely on like super heavily bonded markets. But the issue is, a lot of the issues with the country's funding right now is bad timing. They owe a lot to external creditors over the next year or two. And so they're dealing with this while global financial conditions aren't the best due to recovery from COVID and, of course, the war in Ukraine. And so people are going to be like, bruh, where's my money? That's going to be an issue. It's going to be hard to repay when they're dealing with all these problems.
Can I just say, Pakistan is facing 33 million people who are affected by these floods. That is, but the cathedral fire raised $3 billion, right? A cathedral was on fire. No people were hurt in the process. And the world really rallied together to raise money for a building. Just gonna put it out there.
Adjoa is telling you people to give money to brown people. That is what she's trying to say. I'm going to say it. I don't care.
People of color, not even brown people of color. If you're not white, if you're not blonde, if you don't belong to a Scandinavian country, or we did not originate from a Scandinavian country, our lives are just as important. Our livelihoods are also just as important. So let's really recognize the climate crisis that we are in, and let's recognize that a country that emits less than 1% of global emissions is facing something that is obviously not caused by the Pakistani people. Let's be clear. And of course, I am quoting Antonio Guterres again, the UNSG, on this. Pakistani people did not do them to themselves. This is not on Pakistani people. We are barely emitting 1% of global climate emissions. And this is definitely this is a global climate crisis, and the whole world needs to come together. And today, like I said, today is Pakistan, tomorrow it's going to be another country, and I will be right here advocating for those countries just as well, because rich countries have gotten away for far too long with far too much, and it's about time that we make them pay.
All right. Preach, girl. I'm so sorry. I'm so unserious. But no, it's a serious issue. Another issue we have to think about is the local habitat and biodiversity. And I'm not really going to get into this in detail, but all I'll say is that it's still flooding. So we don't know exactly how much we're going to affect habitats. But it is not the first super flood. So we can look at 2010. And in 2010, it was very destructive. And not even as bad as this. But it led to a huge change in Pakistan. And I want to mention that the country did institute a new wetland restoration plan. Last year, they updated the plan. And so I'm hoping that they will pay more attention to what we call riparian, that is riverbank life, because Pakistan has a lot of rivers. We've discussed this a lot on the show. If you throw off one part of an ecosystem, you are going to see fallout. So I think that's a very important thing to note. Audra, you want to discuss some of the human issues a little bit?
Yes, human problems, of course. Livelihood and livestock is obviously affected, and Pakistan is very vulnerable to extremes, and the whiplash from unprecedented heat that we saw from March to May this year, and that followed by a strong monsoon, it makes the impact on society and the economy even more severe. The extreme heat wave that was suffered earlier in this year, which was 2022, it was made 30 times more likely by global heating, by the way. So what you see today is just a trailer for what's in store for us with poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and disease if we don't pay heed to climate change. And that was said by a very smart person, Ali Taqi Sheikh, who's also a climate expert. So more than 33 million people in Pakistan, like I said earlier, and 3/4 of all districts have been affected by the flooding, which was brought on by monsoon rains. About 1,200 people have been killed and upwards of 1,500 injured. More than 161,000 are now in camps, and those are the people who actually found their spaces in camps. There's a lot other people who are displaced from their homes, did not find a place in camps, and really we don't really know what's happening to them. According to the National Disaster Management Authority, from June 14th to August 28th, the data that they received from the district administrations across the country, 727,000 cattle have died so far. And according to the livestock officials, foot and mouth as well as stomach diseases among cattle could spread in flood-affected areas, and that's just for the cattle that has survived. And now let me make this very clear. People in Pakistan, and especially because we're such an agrarian land and we depend so much on livestock, some people's entire livelihood depends on one cow. So to have 727,000 cattle die, that means a lot, right? I had somebody working at my house who said that they used 5 years worth of their income to save up to buy a cow. And she was like, oh, that's going to help me, my husband, and our 5 children. So just to give you an idea of a single cattle, how much that impacts a single family in Pakistan. According to the financial year 2021 to 2022 economic survey, the livestock sector accounted for 61% of Pakistan's agricultural value-added products, and while the share of livestock in Pakistan's overall GDP was 14%. So this is really a big deal. And 8 million families of the rural population of Pakistan, they raise cattle, and 35 to 40% of their income actually comes from livestock. So that's just like to tell you how much just from livestock really affected people. Now let's talk about the health crisis. Economy, money, elsewhere. Health crisis. Nearly 900 health facilities across the country have been damaged, and of which 180 are completely damaged. And millions have been left without access to healthcare and medical treatment. And of course, the crisis has further aggravated disease outbreaks, which include acute watery diarrhea, dengue fever, malaria, polio, and COVID-19, which is obviously still a pandemic that's happening around the world.
Can y'all imagine dengue fever being a serious issue in 2022? We got a problem, y'all.
Yeah, and when there's stagnant water, of course, anything that is going to be all waterborne diseases that you can imagine are going to be in these areas, right? And particularly in camps and where water and sanitation facilities have been damaged. And Pakistan has already recorded 4,531 measles cases this year and 15 cases of wild polio virus. And that was even before the heavy rainfall and flooding. So the nationwide polio campaign that we have, it has been disrupted in the affected areas. But Ala, do you want to tell us the economic reform attempts and what the government around the world, not just Pakistani government, are doing to actually help this?
I'm going to be very upfront with you guys. Look, take this as you want. Take it with a grain of salt. But this kind of thing doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it's not really the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is if they get multiple kinds of floods as well as riverine flooding.
Can you imagine? This is not the worst case scenario.
It's not. So the thing about riverine flooding, and I'm just going to get like a little technical for a little bit, is because it's dangerous with construction. That's the issue. Like, you should not have sand dredging and mining and construction along riverbanks. Why? Because it alters the channel geometry and the elevation of the riverbeds. You remove sediments, in-stream material extraction disrupts what exists as far as balance between sediment supply and transport capacity. And you guys, like, I'm not even trying to go full chemical engineering nerd or environmental nerd on you, but sediment transport is a very delicate balance, especially where water meets land. Like, it's very delicate. It's not something to disrupt so easily. And one of the issues with riverbeds is you get things called river incisions, which is basically how the channel beds of rivers drop. It happens naturally, but when we exacerbate it as human beings, then what you have is that water and surrounding aquifers run into streams. You lower the water table. We've talked about food shortages, but you know what happens when you lower the water table in aquifers? You have water shortages. And I believe Pakistan is already a country that suffers from water scarcity. It's not really something they can afford right now due to natural issues, but mainly due to unregulated mining in the past. So that's something that's very hard to rectify after the fact. And so that's something that we have to consider. So we need flood management strategies because they are important. They need to be more robust. They need to think about upcoming climate challenges, and we have to protect these communities. We can't just give everybody permits to construct along riverbanks and river shoulders. Even in the US, there's like a set amount. In most countries, there's a set amount of construction, like a set amount of coastline or river line where you can start building on. Even if you want to do something natural, like the work that I do with dunes, we have to stop at a certain line, even with our permits. To go past that line, these are dunes. It's just sand and vegetation. We are not allowed to go past that line because the state has decided it's just not safe. And then another issue, of course, is floodplains, right? Pakistan is agrarian, as we've said, with wetland and forest restoration projects being launched, like I said. So realistically, they should have reservoirs to mitigate these floods. However, the Tabela and Mangla reservoirs on either side of Islamabad have become so choked with silt see what I said about sediment, sweeping down from the Himalayas, that they are losing the ability to swallow up floodwaters and prevent inundation. Adwoa mentioned how soil gets saturated and then can't take any more water. And this is one of those examples. You have to make sure that you are managing your floodplains, you are doing enough restoration, you are keeping sediment where it should be to the best of your ability, because just 57% of Tabela's storage capacity is available. So almost half of it is gone. And as more silt clogs it, then you're going to have a problem, which they expect to see more clogging, by the way. So the country is suffering economically, as we've established, and it's not making as much as it needs to, even in the agrarian sector, where it can export and make extra money. And Pakistan is energy dependent. So they do have a flood management plan. They updated it in 2018. From what I've read so far, it's not like a bad plan. It seems pretty good. So they need to, the local government, the federal government needs to work to establish, they have all these plans and they really need to go forward. And I'm not just talking about infrastructure in terms of buildings and bridges. That's why I didn't mention that stuff, even though that's important. What we need right now is permits, enforcement, where people can build, and restoration of existing floodplains, or even like taking back what has been misused as far as floodplains are concerned. Because whenever people talk about flood infrastructure, they think about buildings and bridges, but they don't think about these things. They're important. If we move to the international landscape, just to echo some of what Adwoa has said, for decades, right, developing countries have argued that wealthier countries who are emitting more greenhouse gases should be paying what we call loss and damages. And we discussed this when we had Risham on the podcast on episode 43. She was talking about COP and Pakistan and climate finance. It's basically a type of climate reparations, right? And there's been a long time debate on it. Should they pay? Who should pay? How much should they pay? And I get it, right? We are living in a time when everybody's struggling financially on a global scale. And no citizens of any country want to be responsible for paying. But the truth is, if you're putting out more emissions, somebody's feeling it somewhere. And there's loss and damage that should be calculated, even if we start with a conservative number. The good thing is there was some notable improvement last year at the UN Climate Summit, the one in Glasgow, when delegates finally agreed to even recognize the term.
And we had a lot to say about it. If you guys remember, you can refer to one of our old episodes.
43. So it might seem a little too late, but it's something that has been debated for so long that I see this as progress, personally. And Scotland, who hosted the summit, was the first developed country in the world to offer money regarding loss and damage. They pledged $2.3 million. However, the US, Australia, no other countries pledged any money. They didn't even want to discuss the idea. I will say last year was a delicate time coming out of COVID, so we hope to see a little more in terms of negotiations for loss and damage in COP27, but fingers crossed. You guys, I'm going to try my hardest to be at COP28 or 29. Like, we are going to go out there.
Yeah, girl.
I looked into it. It's real complicated, girl. Anyway, another thing that we should note is that currently there is a $160 million emergency plan from the UN to help Pakistan. It's aiming to reach 5.2 million of the most vulnerable people. The goal is to deliver life-saving and livelihood assistance. It's not enough money, but it is substantial regardless. They also want to, of course, prevent some of these diseases Adwoa talked about, help with nutrition, and ensure that people are able to find their families and be protected. But like I said, this is a financially precarious time for almost every country worldwide. So where will this money come from? Girl,
we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
Nobody knows.
So we talked a little bit about what they could do regulation-wise. So Adwoa, is there anything else that's hampering these enforcements?
So, I mean, of course, there's political people who are in charge of a lot of it.
Girl, do not start.
Girl, you know I'm about to. But okay, I will keep this in mind. I'll keep this in mind. Guys, Allah calm me down. So here I am. But so the Pakistan Federal Minister for Climate Change, she acknowledged the challenges that we had, right? So she said we are a very small greenhouse gas emitter, which is very true, by the way. So she doesn't think that it's some mitigation efforts that have been lacking. And like we talked about earlier, which is that Pakistan had one of the best climate change programs, which was our 10 billion tree tsunami program, right? And that was a great program. It was hailed around the world. I think the UK tried to have something similar, right? So it's not that. But yes, certainly we do have to build back climate resilient infrastructure, and we do have to focus on adaptation. Mitigation is definitely not an option. And we've been very focused on our global promises on mitigation, and we just realized that that's really led us nowhere, as you can see. And Sherry Rahman, the Pakistan's Federal Minister for Climate Change, agrees with me on that.
I will say, I just want to say something with this regard. It's like I just said earlier, when people talk about climate change adaptation, when it comes to infrastructure, they're talking about buildings and bridges and roads. And they're ignoring like all their floodplain management and restoration. Like Pakistan has all these plans that they keep putting out. Good plans, in some regards, great plans considering the country's economic financial situation. But how much of it is being enacted? What steps are they taking in that regard? I do think as far as the emissions go and the climate change, I'm not going to put that on Pakistan, people or government. But as far as adaptation goes, in terms of just restoration efforts, and I know I say restoration a lot, it's what I do right now. And also it's something I'm very passionate about. I just don't think that they have done enough in that regard. So I think that they should be honest about that, because people's lives are at stake. And maybe it's not just Pakistan pissing me off with this. My own home country of Nigeria as well. I hate when developing nations do this. I hate when any nation does this and they try to ignore what they could have done in that regard.
I feel like there's definitely regard to what they're saying. Of course, there's definitely some weight to what they're saying, which is true, right? Like countries like ours, like Pakistan, they cannot rely on mitigation efforts because Pakistan doesn't really put out much in the atmosphere for it to really help change that, and we will still face the brunt of it. So I understand the mitigation part, but adaptation is still and like you said, it's a very easy cop-out for governments to say just, oh, we couldn't have done anything. But yes, you could have. Maybe you couldn't have stopped this from happening, but you could have definitely made it be a lot less severe.
Yeah.
Right? So the governments are responsible for their people. We did elect you. We did go out of our way. Government officials, people who are elected officials, do owe their people something, and these adaptation efforts are exactly that. And like Ala has mentioned, there are so many ways that we could have done. And again, not to put this on Pakistani people, of course, because this is a global climate crisis, and of course there's so much that rich countries are putting in, and they are definitely, the onus is on them, but your people are your responsibility. So to help those people, governments should set up whatever, they should see what the global concerns are, what the global trends are, and then help and then adapt to see what they can do to make their countries better. And according to research, of course, high rainfall and low salinity times came after periods of high concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide and lower levels of global ice volume, and then subsequent increases in regional moisture-bearing winds. So if global emissions keep rising, we will see flooding. The only difference that communities or local governments can make is that you can make urban infrastructure that is more climate resilient, and that's what we really need to do. But Ala, okay, what is your biggest takeaway from this episode?
I don't know. Look, I think that this all comes down to money. Again, I'll say it. Money runs the world. Y'all hear me, because mitigation in a country that doesn't release a lot of emissions is not expensive. Adaptation is, especially in a country that is energy dependent. They need money. Nobody wants to say it, but you need money, which means you need to be properly managing your country's finances, and which means that you need help externally. The biggest takeaway from this is money, whether people want to hear it or not. So, Audra, do you think that we can stop the floods, reduce them? Are we past the point of no return? Is it straight up apocalypse? Is anything going to change?
Okay, so I don't know if you can stop the floods really with the global trends about emissions. I'm not sure about stopping the floods. I think really we are not at a point, especially countries like Pakistan. I feel it's definitely apocalypse for the people who it's happening to, because like, you know, if you are dying, your livelihood is dying, your children are dying. It is apocalypse, but I would say that it's an 8 on a scale of 1 to apocalypse, because there is room for it to get way worse, and that's what's going to happen if you don't actually make the proper changes. us as a country with adaptative measures and the global community for mitigation measures.
I'll give it a 9.3. That's where I'm putting it. Question for you guys. What is something that you've seen your government or a neighboring government do to try to manage like something extreme, like flood, drought, extreme cold? I live in Texas, so fuck Greg Abbott, because he doesn't do shit. For this episode, we wanted to take a different route with organizations. We're going to give you guys a couple of organizations, and we're also going to put this on social media on Wednesday, the day after the episode airs. So we are discussing organizations that are underground, that help flood-affected families. They provide tents, food, temporary accommodations, and they also help people rebuild their livelihoods through employment and other opportunities. Please look into them. We urge you. This is really serious. They need help. And as Adwa has said 500 times, rich countries ain't giving it. So the Akwat Foundation, the Al-Khidmat Foundation, the Citizens Foundation, and the Balochistan Youth Action Committee. Of course, in show notes, we have links. And like I said, they will be on social media. And our hearts go out to the victims of this disaster in Pakistan. Please donate or contribute however you can to these organizations. We truly are like so happy and so blessed to be back doing this show.
Yes, we are very excited. Apart from all this global disasters that are happening. But yes, we are very excited.
Yeah. And like we said, like our new series is coming. It's a lot lighter, guys. We're not going to do just heavy stuff. I know this one was heavy coming back, but you know, it had to be talked about. But next Tuesday, not this Tuesday, you listen to us. So next week, we're going to be discussing the truth behind how poisonous fast fashion can be. We got this one off Twitter, where I live. Hint, Sheen nails. Okay. Think Sheen nails. I know y'all see the trending topics. And follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, or find us on Facebook. Email your questions and comments to planetpolicypals@gmail.com or hit us up in our DMs. We love y'all. And until next time, keep learning.